Lake Joy Lions. It's Miss Thomas and Miss McCorkle here, and we are here with a short video to read to you a read aloud called America's White Table. And as many of you guys know, that Miss Thomas and Miss McCorkle served in the military, so we're going to talk about some of our experiences as active duty and now veterans. So, with that being said, before Miss McCorkle starts to read the book, we have a question. As a class, can you identify the 8 items that are placed on the white table and what they represent? So be listening as Miss McCorkle is reading and try to identify those 8 things. And if you've noticed in the center hallway of the school this morning, you saw a white table, so you might already know some of the things that are placed there.
All right, America's White Table by Margot Raven. It was just a little white table, but it brought tears of pride to my Uncle John's eyes the Veterans Day he came for dinner and stood by it, except for one person, even though no one would be eating at it. It was just a little white table, but earlier that day, Mama told Gretchen, Samantha, and me that the little table we were setting for Veterans Day was just like the ones that stood across America in the dining halls of the Army, Navy, Marine Corps, and Air Force since the Vietnam War ended. The table honors the men and women who serve in America's armed forces, especially those missing in action, our MIAs, and those held prisoner of war, our POWs. It was just a little white table, but it felt as big as America when we helped Mama put each item on it, and she told us why it was so important. We use a small table, girls, she explained first, to show one soldier's lonely battle against many. We cover it with a white cloth to honor a soldier's pure heart when he answered his country's call to duty. We placed a lemon slice and grains of salt on a plate to show a captive soldier's bitter fate and the tears of families waiting for loved ones to return, she continued. We push an empty chair to the table for the missing soldiers who are not here. We lay a black napkin for the sorrow of captivity and turn over a glass for the meal that won't be eaten, she said. We place a white candle for peace, and finally, a red rose in a vase tied with a red ribbon for the hope that all our missing will return someday. Mama finished speaking just as sunlight spilled on the table and filled the overturned glass. It was just a little white table, but it suddenly made me want to burst with a feeling I couldn't explain when Mama told us how much our setting the white table would mean to Uncle John that night. Then she told us something we didn't know. Our Uncle John, who gave us big bear hugs and spun us on airplane twirls and called me Katie Girl, was a POW in Vietnam before we were born. It was just a little white table, but it gave us the courage to ask Mama what happened to Uncle John in Vietnam. And she quietly told us his story.
When Uncle John served in Vietnam, he was sent on a rescue mission as his helicopter was shot down behind enemy lines, she began. As he and his 3 crew members were taken prisoner, our crew member named Mike had serious wounds from the crash, but Uncle John and the other men tried to help Mike get better and persuaded a guard to bring Mike medicine. Then one day, a guard looked away. Uncle John and the others had a chance to escape, but Mike was still too sick to go, so Uncle John stayed behind because he wouldn't leave a fellow soldier alone so far from home. But how did Uncle John get free? We asked Mama. Sometime later, Uncle John had a chance to escape again, and somehow he was able to take Mike with him, carrying him on his back and collecting just enough rainwater and big leaves to keep them alive until Uncle John found an American infantry unit to help them. But even though Uncle John did everything he could to bring Mike home alive, Mike's wounds were just too serious, and he died before the rescue helicopter landed. I know that Mike was only 20 years old, and he dreamed of playing football, but he loved America enough to give his life for his country when duty called. And I know how much Uncle John loves America too, but he learned when helping Mike that a soldier risks his life for a fellow soldier because the best of your country lives in every man and woman who would lay down their life for you too. It was just a little white table.
But it needed words of gratitude, like Mama's Thanksgiving meal. So before Uncle John arrived for dinner, Gretchen and Samantha and I decided to put 3 gifts of our own on the table to honor our veterans. Gretchen colored pictures of all of the objects on the table, and Samantha wrote out the words of "My country, 'tis of thee" as a tribute in song. But I didn't know what I, a 10-year-old girl, could ever put on the table that was as important as each veteran's gift of freedom to me. It was just a little white table, but I looked at it all dinner long, and in the quiet inside me, I could almost hear the silent soldiers of the empty chair saying, "Please remember us. We are all real people like your Uncle John and Mike, who left families and friends, homes and dreams of our own to protect your birthright of liberty from disappearing as easily as sunlight from a glass." It was just a little white table, but it took my words away when I hugged Uncle John goodnight and wanted to thank him for serving our country so bravely. So I just hugged him even harder and told him I loved him. Uncle John hugged me back even harder than I hugged him. And that's when I knew what I could put on the table, my promise, and put the words from my heart into a little book about America's white table. And in the book, I'd use Gretchen's pictures and Samantha's song and Mama's story about Uncle John and his friend Mike, because I hope that everyone who read it would set a white table on Veterans Day too, so the brave Americans the little white table honors won't ever feel forgotten by the country they love so much. Then in the salt on the little white table, I traced in the grains of their families' tears what each man and woman who serves America is to me, a hero. And that's when I saw the tears of pride fill my Uncle John's eyes. The end.
Thank you, Ms. McCorkle, for reading that. So now we are going to start talking about some of our experiences in the military. But before we do that, if you are a student or a teacher in the classroom right now and you know a veteran, so it could be a mom, a dad, a grandma, grandparent, uncle, maybe a sibling, please stand up, and we would just like to acknowledge those. And for those who are not standing, can we just please give a round of applause for those family members of veterans? Thank you. You may be seated. All right, so as I mentioned earlier, I was in the Marine Corps and I served for 8 years. I joined right after high school, so I was in from 2007 to 2015.
And I was in the Navy. I also joined right out of high school. So I was in from 2002 to 2006.
And while I was in, I was a field radio operator, so I was in the communications field. If you've ever seen like a wartime movie, it's the person who has like the radio with the big antenna on their back running around, but it's a lot more advanced now than the wartime movies, but it was a fun, exciting job, and I loved it very much.
And I worked in the engineering department, but I did the soils testing and the drawings of the buildings and everything that you had to do before they built the buildings, and that was
So like architecture.
pretty much.
They were called CBs. Yes, they're good people. And while I was in for 8 years, I deployed 3 times. The first deployment was on a ship for 7 months with the Navy, and we stopped in many countries that include Thailand, Djibouti, we stopped in Guam, and I'm drawing a blank, in Jordan. It was a few places on the Western Pacific. And then after 6 months after that, I went to Afghanistan for 7 months. Came back with no scratches, so that's good. And then after I gave birth to Jayla, about 10 months, when she was about 10 months old, I had to leave her, and I went to Bahrain, and I was there for 7 months.
My first deployment actually was Kuwait. Our plane broke on our way there, so we were stuck in Greece for about a month, which was awesome. And then we were in Kuwait for a few months. And then my next deployment was to Okinawa, Japan, and we stopped in Germany on our way there and Alaska on our way home. And I actually got out after I had Kylie, so
Yeah,
same reason.
it was time to go after I
Yes.
had Joy. We got out. But we don't want to take too much of the time, and we appreciate the teachers who have played this video for your students just to show the importance of Veterans Day. And both of our times were well served. It was a good time, and it's kind of helped us get to be great teachers that we believe that we are now. Yeah.
Thank you.
Anything else? Thanks. Bye. Have a good day.